So this is actually a relevant image to approach right after I finished reading a short history of man, progress and decline. That review will be up probably next week. TMR number 89 if you want to Google it. But this is something I saw on a socialist page. Human nature is not capitalist. Human evolution. Humans could not have survived without cooperation. We are weak, slow, tasty, but we work together. We are intelligent. Yes. That is something that, in the early history of man, that is something that happened. Human beings were weak, they were slow, and there were lots of predators. So what they did is they worked together in small groups. Now, emphasis on the small groups. We're talking about early history here. Now, is that socialism? I guess you can call it like communitarianism, probably. They didn't really have property rights back then. The idea was you didn't have to hunt in groups, otherwise you died. So I will grant them that much. I don't think, they seem to think that working together is somehow a socialist idea, and that's not true. I mean, what do you think a business is? People work together. Pretty much any organized group work together. That happens in capitalism all the time. But I'll grant that in this case, back in the early days, people did not have property rights because there was no property to have, really. It was all just, you traveled the land and hoped to survive. It was like something like one human per one square mile could feed one human being. So they took like, these small groups of people that covered, they were nomads. They traveled, they hunted and gathered. They didn't actually create anything. They didn't produce anything. They just traveled the land and hoped there was enough food to survive. And then they encountered what was called the Malthusian trap, essentially. That the idea that after you reach a certain population, because of course that's what human beings do, they reproduce. They don't really think about the consequences back then. They just reproduce, they breed, and they grow, just like any other animal species, or any other species at all. But they grow, and eventually they hit the point where there's not enough food. This is what happens with rabbits. There's not enough food to survive, so they die out. They starve. There was something earlier back on. They pretty much realized, when they realized that there wasn't enough food, they essentially would do the punch pregnant women in the chest in the belly to try to incite an abortion. They would practice infanticide. The idea was you had to pretty much kill your young if there were too many because you needed to survive. So not exactly a good point in history to say, look, evidence of socialism. But no, they kept running into the Malthusian trap because they didn't produce anything. There was no production. It was all you had to essentially just keep traveling and keep your population low enough that you still that there was enough food to survive. And of course, eventually you would run into other people, and those people you would compete over the land, and of course, and so it was all bad. It was all pretty much really bad. I just want to say that much. Next, altruism is all around us. Now they go back to the present day for some reason. Altruism is all around us. Consider charities, friends, volunteer work. We don't murder each other to get ahead. So, what? So again, under capitalism, charities, these are all like charities, volunteer work, friends. These are all things that operate under capitalism. You can have an anarcho-capitalist society. You can get rid of all, like, assuming that would work. There would still be charities and friendship and volunteer work. These things would still happen. So the idea that they are socialists, this is what I don't get about socialists. They say that pretty much like competing is capitalism and working together is socialism. That's not necessarily true. Again, competition is part of capitalism, but it's not a personal, angry, vendetta-type competition. It's the idea of, okay, I'm going to try doing something. I can get friends to work together, and we can try doing something. That's cooperation right there. But we are also competing with another group of people who are going to try to do the same thing. Essentially, I just described a similar example to the first example up here, that you get a tribe of people, they work to survive. Other people are also doing that. You might run into problems. You're competing for resources, but that's the idea that you can have both cooperation and competition. It's like a sports team, right? You can get one sports team. These people are cooperating to win, but they're also competing against another sports team. That's the idea of you can have both of them, and you do have both of them under capitalism. Again, volunteer work, friends, charities, these are all capitalist things. I am someone that is very you'll find few people that are as pro-capitalist as I am, but I actually have friends. I have given to charities before. I've worked for charities. I've done volunteer work before, believe it or not. So again, it's like this idea that, the idea of a pure capitalist society wouldn't have volunteering and friends and charity. That's nonsense. Altruism, in the sense that they describe, it can exist under capitalism, and does exist under capitalism. The idea that altruism is anti-capitalist is just, no. Our material conditions create us. Capitalism forces us to compete for survival. We are coerced into competition. Okay, so capitalism, if the official, system of capitalism didn't really come about until 15, 16, 1700, somewhere around there. The idea of actually like capitalism as a system really didn't come about until the last few centuries. But the idea of our material conditions create us, that is for the most part pretty true. Again, as they described in the early hunter-gatherer societies, when you have pretty much nothing, when you go and you hunt and you gather, that creates your society. Sure, that defines you, that defines how you act. In a lot of ways, you're still a free will, but of course that does play a major influence. You're going to act differently, whether you're in the Soviet Union or a capitalist society or America today, or again, the earlier hunter-gatherer societies hundreds and actually thousands of years ago. Our material conditions create us. Capitalism forces us to compete for survival. So again, capitalism as a system, well, looking back here, they worked together. They competed for, they were hunter-gatherers. They were competing for survival. That was what happened. They were competing for survival against other tribes. They were competing against nature. They were competing against anything for survival. That was the thing. It sucked. It's awful. This thing seems to imply that this might have been an anarcho-privativist that wrote this, because they seem to think that things were pretty great back then, but no, it sucked. You died. You didn't have healthcare back in the early hunter-gatherer societies. Believe it or not, you didn't have free healthcare. Things like that. No, capitalism forces us to compete for survival. No, that's more just human nature. That is reality itself. Forces you to compete for survival. Whatever system you are in, you're going to have to survive. And as long as there are resources, as long as there is scarcity at all, you will have to compete, because again, I want something, you want something, there is only one thing to have, we are going to compete for it. That's how that works. Scarcity has you compete. But the great thing about capitalism is that it does the exact opposite. It tries to create, it tries to produce. Capitalism is not about consuming, it is about producing. That's the thing. It is not about to consume. It is about producing things. That's the great thing. Capitalism is a production society. That's what the Industrial Revolution was. It was about how much can we produce? Can we eliminate scarcity? And now, can we ever truly eliminate scarcity? I suppose no. There will always be something that humans want that there is not an unlimited supply of, but that's the idea, that capitalism is about producing and reducing scarcity. So when you produce things and you reduce scarcity, you inevitably remove conflict. Because again, if you want something and I want something and there's only one thing, we're going to have to find some way of getting what we want. We might have to fight for it and kill one another for it. We might have to negotiate a contract about both of us using this object, or depending on what the object is. We might work together to produce more of the object. Whatever we do, the idea is to satisfy both of our needs. And the thing is, under capitalism, it's again, we're producing more things. If we get to the point where you want something and I want something and there's two things and we can each have one, that we're not going to compete. We're not going to fight against one another because we both have that resource. And that's essentially how capitalism works. We are told the only way is to be selfish. Again, I personally, if there's one thing you can take from the objectivism, there's one good thing about objectivism that you can, if you want to toss out the rest, but there's one thing you keep, it's the idea of selfishness. I think they hit that. The way they view selfishness is much more accurate in terms of viewing the world. So their idea of selfishness is not, I want something, screw everyone else. It's the idea of primarily being concerned with your own self-interest. And that is something that's not so much as something we should strive for as much as it is a fact of reality. That we are all interested in our own self-interest. And that's just, no matter what you do, you are always self-interested. Is the approach that I would take. So yeah, we are all pretty much selfish. We all want what we want. And the idea is, if I sacrifice myself for someone else, that is a selfish act, because I value them, their life, greater than I value my life. Or whatever kind of sacrifice. Again, charity. If I do charity work, it's because I value, maybe it's because I just want to virtue signal and I want to say, hey, I'm a good person, but I value that feeling of helping people. Or it could be because I really do value, I want those people to be better, and I value that more than my time that I spend volunteering. So in that sense, if you look at it from that approach, I think that's much more accurate as to what human nature actually is. The idea of we're all pursuing our own self-interests, and that's something that no matter how hard you try, no matter how altruistic you are, you're still pursuing your own self-interest, whatever that interest is. Of course, it's different from person to person. A narcissist and someone that is a terrible, greedy, evil person, they're pursuing their own self-interest. Someone that devotes their entire life to volunteer work and helping the poor, their own self-interest is helping the poor, and they are pursuing that. So in that sense, I think that's a better approach of viewing things, because we are told the only way is to be selfish. I mean, that's just a fact of human nature, right? Like even the socialists, right? They're pursuing their own self-interest. Whether they like it or not. I think that's less something we can choose and more of just a fact of reality. Capitalism is not human nature. Socialism is. Well, I mean, capitalism is human nature, right? Because if socialism, you're talking about, I actually wrote an article on this recently on equality and the idea of equality in socialism. That'll come out on Friday, the July 12th, beinglibertarian.com. But yeah, capitalism is not human nature. Well, we just find that when you reduce government constraints like that, when you reduce artificial constraints, people naturally develop hierarchies. People naturally trade and form organizations, and they compete with one another. That is a very natural thing we find that happens. Say capitalism is not human nature. Well, the opposite seems to be true. Again, every time we try socialism, it doesn't work. So it's like you can go back 1,000 years and say, oh, there used to be hunter-gatherer societies. Yeah, I don't want to go back there. That kind of sucked. The idea was things got a lot better because you were stuck in that because we broke out of the Malthusian trap. We broke out of the idea that once the Industrial Revolution happened, turns out our population can keep growing. Like, just look at a graph of human population. We find that we broke out of that. We were the only species to ever break out of that and realize that we can just keep having more kids. We can just keep growing and growing and growing, and it's not going to kill us, right? The idea was, as population grew, you had to suffer. Like, there was resources were limited in society. Again, that's what the case with wolves and pretty much every animal, wolves and rabbits and that as you grow, if you're not producing and you're just consuming the resources of society, you're going to have to lower your population or suffer. And that's pretty brutal. It's pretty awful. But we're at this point where we can manipulate our society to produce more. Once we become production societies, well then, there's more people? Well, let's just produce more. That works. We can produce enough to account for all these people. And that's the great thing. Like, the great thing is, yeah, we can really take care of everyone. And the weird thing is the socialists keep pointing out, like, oh, what kind of society? We don't have, capitalism doesn't give everyone free healthcare. It doesn't give everyone all this free stuff. And it's like, you can't compare reality to a utopian vision. You have to compare reality to reality. You have to compare, you have to say, okay, well, capitalism gave us the best period in human history. Like, I think even the people that say, even some of the conservatives that say life was so great back then, life was so great 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's like, well, in some senses, sure. In some senses, we do see some negative things, like something with suicide rates and stuff like that. We do see some negatives. Then sure, if you want to take one specific variable, you can say, sure, it wasn't that great back then. But I think overall, we can say we are at a net benefit. We understand things better. And of course, again, there are certain times like the Soviet Union where things were probably better before the Soviet Union, and things were also better right after the Soviet Union. There was that down spot there. It's not a linear growth. There's ups and downs. There's depressions. There's recessions and that kind of thing. And then there's periods of great growth. So it's not perfectly linear, but overall, like, you take a great view of history. Overall, things are much better than they used to be. Because the idea of it's like, would I want to live, and where would I want to live? Well, I'd rather live like a century from now than a century ago. I think it would be better off then. Maybe people disagree with me. Let me know why if you do disagree. You can say life was simpler back then. But the nice thing about capitalism is you have a greater opportunity to mold your own world. When you have your own choices, you have a greater opportunity to make the world you want to see. It's like if you don't like this consumerism, this whole buy everything, this whole just produce, and like if you don't like the society we see today, the nice thing is there are plenty of spots in the world where you can if you work hard, you save up enough money, there are plenty of spots where you can go that they don't have internet connection, they're small communities, especially in the Midwest of America. You can go to these societies and you can live like that. You can go. The idea of, I think, the amount of different scenarios you can live in today's society, in today's world, is much greater than it was at any point before. So that kind of got off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, pretty much. I don't like the idea of people saying socialism is human nature. It's like, no, that's flat out false. I mean, if you really have to go back to earlier hunter-gatherer societies, pre-property rights societies, and say that's better off, no. If you have to go back that far, then I think you've pretty much nullified your own argument. And of course, if we tried going back there, then we run into the same Malthusian trap, where, as we've seen, that when you try to create a socialist society, people run out of things. When you get rid of property rights, you run into that trap where you can't sustain a certain population. But, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think I made my point. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more. And thanks for watching.